The sky above the Velen homeworld burned orange and red. Elder Miran stood at the window of the council chamber, watching another section of the city shield flicker and fail. Beyond that barrier, the Krath fleet waited like predators circling wounded prey. How long? Miran asked without turning around. The young technician behind him trembled as he checked his displays. 18 hours, Elder. Maybe 20 if we divert power from the medical centers. Miran's forearms drooped with exhaustion. The Velens had never built weapons. They had never needed to. For 3,000 years, their people had healed the sick and studied the arts of medicine. They had believed that goodness and knowledge would protect them. They had been wrong. The council still refuses our request? Asked Councilmember Tevin, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Miran said. The Galactic Council voted this morning. 43 species voted to abandon us. Only 6 voted to help, and none of them have military strength. Tevin's face went pale. But the Krath have destroyed 16 colonies already. Everyone knows what they do to the populations they conquer. How can the council just watch? Miran turned from the window. His old eyes were tired but clear. They watch because they are afraid. The Krath Empire controls 200 systems now. Their fleet is the largest in this sector. No one wants to stand against them. Outside, another explosion lit up the darkening sky. A Krath missile had tested their shields again. The barrier held, but barely. Each impact drained their remaining power faster. Commander Kyle Harrison sat in the human embassy building 3 blocks away, watching the same explosions. He had been on the Velen homeworld for 2 years as part of Earth's diplomatic mission. In that time, he had grown to respect these gentle people and their dedication to saving lives. Sir, we need to evacuate, said Lieutenant Danny Cooper, Harrison's second in command. The embassy shuttle can get us out in the next few hours. Harrison shook his head. We're not leaving these people, Danny. With respect, sir, there's nothing we can do. Earth sent us here as observers, not soldiers. We have 1 shuttle and 6 rifles between the whole staff. Then we observe, Harrison said quietly. And we report everything to command. Dr. Sophie Bennett entered the room, her face streaked with dust from the latest shield impact. She had been working at the Central Hospital, helping Velen doctors prepare for the worst. Kyle, you need to see this. She activated a holographic display. It showed the Krath fleet in orbit, more than 300 warships arranged in a perfect siege formation. Each ship bristled with weapons capable of reducing cities to ash. The Velens have run every scenario through their computers, Sophie said. Once the shields fall, the Krath will level every city in under 6 hours. They're not here to conquer. They're here to exterminate and take the planet empty. Harrison felt cold anger settle in his chest. He had seen reports from other Krath attacks. The Empire didn't believe in prisoners or mercy. They believed in total destruction. Why the Velens? Danny asked. They're doctors and artists. They don't even have a military. That's exactly why, Sophie said. The Velens control the most advanced medical technology in this sector. The Krath want that knowledge, and they don't want to negotiate for it. Easier to kill everyone and take it from the ruins. Harrison stood and walked to the window. Below, he could see Velen families hurrying through the streets. Parents carried children. The elderly helped each other along. They were trying to reach the deeper shelters, though everyone knew those shelters would only delay the inevitable. Have you contacted Earth? He asked. 3 times, Sophie said. They're monitoring the situation, but we're 12 days away at best speed. Even if the fleet left right now, they wouldn't arrive in time. Harrison's jaw tightened. 12 days. The Velens had less than 1 dot in the council chamber. Elder Miran made a decision that would shame him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. He activated the long-range communication system and entered a frequency he had sworn never to use. "What are you doing?" Tevin asked, alarm in his voice. "What I must," Mirren said. The communication system connected. On the screen appeared a human face, stern and weathered. Admiral Greg Wallace, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Force. "This is Elder Mirren of the Velen Council," Mirren began, forcing the words out. "I am calling to request immediate military assistance against the Krath Empire." Admiral Wallace's expression didn't change. "Elder Mirren, I seem to recall that 8 years ago, the Velen delegation voted against humanity's admission to the Galactic Council. Your representative called us, and I quote, 'dangerous warmongers unfit for civilized space.'" Mirren felt the weight of those words like physical blows. It was all true. The Velens had feared humanity's military strength. They had heard stories of human wars, of the terrible weapons humans built, of the Battle of Broken Moon, where a human fleet had annihilated an invasion force so completely that debris still orbited that dead world. "Yes," Mirren said simply. "We said those things. We believed them. We were wrong." Admiral Wallace leaned forward slightly. "Go on. We are dying, Admiral. The Krath fleet will break through our shields in less than a day. They will kill every man, woman, and child on this planet. The Galactic Council has abandoned us. We have no weapons, no soldiers, no hope." Marian's voice cracked. "I am begging you. I am begging the species we called monsters to save us from real monsters." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me all tactical data on the Krath fleet positions and your defensive status. I'll present your request to command." The screen went dark. TVA stared at Mirren. "They'll never come." "Why would they? After what we said about them." Mirren returned to the window. Another section of shield flickered. The orange glow of Krath weapons lit the darkness beyond. "Because," Mirren said softly, "humans understand something we never did. The difference between having the power to destroy and choosing when to use it." Commander Harrison received the alert on his personal comm. Earth Command was holding an emergency session. The Velen request for aid was being debated at the highest levels. He looked at Sophie and Danny. "It's up to them now. Do you think they'll come?" Sophie asked. Harrison thought about the human ships in orbit around Earth, the massive carriers and destroyers that kept the home system safe. He thought about the admirals and generals who had fought in the border wars, who knew the cost of battle better than anyone. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know this. If we don't come, the Velens die. All of them. And every species in the galaxy will remember that when people called for help, the ones who could answer chose not to." Outside, the Velen sun began to set. The shields flickered again, weaker than before. Families held each other in the streets. Children cried. The old ones prayed to gods who seemed far away. And in the darkness of space beyond, the Krath fleet waited with patient hunger, counting down the hours until the slaughter could begin. The emergency council chamber on Earth was filled with tension. Holographic displays showed the Velen homeworld from every angle, surrounded by red markers indicating Krath warships. 312 vessels, all heavily armed, all waiting to kill. Admiral Greg Wallace stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. Around him sat the most powerful military and political leaders of humanity. The decision they made in the next hour would determine the fate of an entire species. "Let's be clear about what we're discussing," said Ambassador Nicole Parker. "The Velens didn't just vote against us. They actively campaigned to keep us out of the Galactic Council. They called us savages. They spread propaganda about human aggression across 24 systems." "All true," Admiral Wallace acknowledged. "Does that mean we let them die?" General Frank Morrison, commander of ground forces, pulled up a tactical display. "Look at these numbers. The Krath have over 300 ships. Our closest fleet, the 5th, has 32 vessels. We'd be outnumbered nearly 10 to 1. The 5th Fleet is also our most advanced, said Captain Linda Hayes, who commanded the destroyer Valiant. Every ship has been upgraded with the new plasma lance systems. Our fighters carry the Mark 7 missiles. Ship for ship, we outclass anything the Krath have. On paper, Morrison said. But there's outclassing the enemy, and then there's surviving those odds. We could lose the entire fleet. Ambassador Parker leaned forward. And there's the political situation to consider. If we intervene, we're essentially declaring war on the Krath Empire. That's 200 systems and the largest military force in the sector. Are we ready for that war? Admiral Wallace pulled up another display. This one showed footage from Krath conquests. Cities burning. Populations being slaughtered. The images were brutal and clear. The Krath don't negotiate, Wallace said quietly. They don't take prisoners. They don't believe in mercy. After they finish with the Velans, who's next? How many more species do we watch die before we decide it's too many? Dr. Sophie Bennett's voice crackled over the communication system from the Velan homeworld. Sirs, I'm sending updated data from the Velan research centers. In the last 5 years, they've developed cures for redshift fever and cellular decay syndrome. Both diseases affect our colonies. The Velans shared that research freely with us, even after the council vote. The room went quiet. Redshift fever had killed thousands of colonists on the outer settlements. The Velan cure had saved countless human lives. Commander Kyle Harrison's voice came through next. Admiral, I'm watching families evacuate to the deep shelters right now. There's a mother down there carrying 2 children. She's singing to them, trying to keep them calm. They're going to die in about 15 hours, and she's singing. Commander, Ambassador Parker said sharply, emotional arguments aren't going to help here. We need to think strategically. With respect, Ambassador, strategy without morality is just tactics, Harrison replied. We have the power to save these people. The question isn't whether we can. It's whether we will. General Morrison stood and walked to the tactical display. He studied it for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Everyone in the room knew Morrison's history. He had fought in the border wars. He had lost half his unit at the Siege of Titan. He understood the cost of battle better than anyone. I've spent 30 years learning how to fight, Morrison said slowly. Learning how to win. But I also learned something else. If we only use our strength to protect ourselves, we're no better than the Krath. Maybe the Velans were right to fear us 8 years ago. Maybe we were too aggressive, too quick to solve problems with weapons. He turned to face the council. But this is our chance to show them they were wrong. Not by talking, by doing. We save them because it's right. Because that's who we choose to be. Admiral Wallace nodded slowly. Captain Hayes, if we commit the 5th Fleet, what are our chances? Linda Hayes pulled up a tactical simulation she had been running since the meeting began. The Krath rely on numerical superiority and heavy bombardment. Their ships are tough but slow. Their tactics are predictable. If we hit them with precision strikes, use our speed advantage, and control the engagement zones, we can win. Can win isn't the same as will win, Parker pointed out. No, Hayes admitted. There will be losses, maybe significant ones. But we can break their fleet and save the Velan population. I'd stake my career on it. You'd be staking more than your career, Morrison said. You'd be staking the lives of every crew member in that fleet. I know, sir. And I'd still go. Admiral Wallace looked around the room. He saw the doubt on some faces, the determination on others. This was the burden of command, making decisions when there were no perfect answers. The Krath have been expanding for 20 years, Wallace said. Every species they encounter has 2 choices, submit or die. The Galactic Council watches and does nothing because they're afraid. They let the Krath grow stronger because taking action seems too risky. He activated another display, showing Earth and its colonies. We've built something good here. Not perfect, but good. We have laws and rights and the belief that power should protect, not dominate. If we turn away from the Velans now, what does that say about those beliefs? It says we're practical, Ambassador Parker said. It says we don't throw away human lives for people who despised us. It says we're no different from the Galactic Council. Harrison's voice came through the comm. It says we only help when it's convenient. The debate continued for another 20 minutes. Arguments flew back and forth. Statistical analysis was countered with moral imperatives. Risk assessments clashed with ethical obligations. Finally, Admiral Wallace held up his hand. Enough. We vote. All in favor of deploying the Fifth Fleet to assist the Velans? General Morrison's hand went up first. Then Captain Hayes. Dr. Bennett voted yes from the Violent Homeworld. Commander Harrison did the same. Slowly, others joined. When the count finished, the vote was 14-7 in favor of intervention. Ambassador Parker shook her head. I hope you're all right about this. So do I, Wallace said. He turned to his communication officer. Get me Captain Hayes and the Fifth Fleet Command Staff. Full mobilization. Emergency protocols. I want every ship ready to move in 2 hours. The officer saluted and rushed out. Wallace pulled up the star charts, calculating jump points and travel times. At maximum speed, pushing the engines beyond safe limits, the Fifth Fleet could reach the Velan homeworld in 3 days. 3 days. The Velans had less than one before their shields failed. We can't get there in time, Ambassador Parker said, seeing the same numbers. No, Wallace agreed. But we can give them hope. He opened a channel to the Velan homeworld. Elder Moran's face appeared, aged 10 years from stress and fear. Elder Moran, this is Admiral Wallace. The Fifth Fleet is being mobilized as we speak. We'll be there in 72 hours. Moran's face showed relief and despair at once. Admiral, our shields will fail in 18 hours. We won't last that long. Then you need to make them last longer, Wallace said firmly. Divert every system you have to the shields. Medical centers, research facilities, everything. Commander Harrison will coordinate with your technicians on power management. Even with everything, we might last another 6 hours at most. Wallace leaned closer to the screen. Elder Mirren, I need you to listen very carefully. Help is coming. Real help. Human help. We don't abandon people who call for aid. Not anymore. Hold on. Do whatever you must, but hold on. Mirren's eyes filled with tears. Why? After everything we said about you. After we rejected you. Why would you do this? Admiral Wallace was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because you were wrong about us. And this is how we prove it. The transmission ended. Wallace turned to find General Morrison standing beside him. Think they can hold out long enough? Morrison asked. They have to, Wallace said. Because if they don't, we arrive just in time to avenge them. And I'm tired of revenge being our only option. On the Velan homeworld, Elder Moran relayed the news to the Council. The shields were reinforced with every spare ounce of power. Hospitals went dark, except for emergency lighting. Research centers shut down. Whole city blocks powered off. The shield strength increased by 11%. Enough to buy maybe 4 more hours in orbit. Warlord Krethix of the Krath Empire watched the power fluctuations with amusement. The prey was desperate. That made the hunt more satisfying. He had never heard of humans before. Some minor species from a distant sector, apparently. No matter. If they came, he would destroy them too. After all, the Krath had conquered 40 systems. What was one more? The human Fifth Fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of the Velen system in perfect formation. 32 warships, each one bearing the scars of previous battles and the pride of Earth's determination. They had pushed their engines beyond safe limits, cutting the journey from 3 days to 56 hours. They were still 12 hours too late. Admiral Greg Wallace stood on the bridge of the carrier Defender, watching the tactical display with growing anger. The Velen shields had failed 4 hours ago. Krath landing forces were already on the surface, beginning their systematic destruction. Status of the Velen population? Wallace asked. Lieutenant Amy Richardson checked her sensors. Sir, approximately 40% made it to the deep shelters before shield failure. The rest are scattered throughout the cities. Krath ground forces are advancing on all major population centers. And their fleet? 312 vessels in a siege formation around the planet. They've detected our arrival. They're repositioning to intercept. Wallace studied the enemy formation. The Krath ships were massive and heavily armed, but they moved with the sluggish confidence of predators who had never met serious resistance. Open a channel to the Krath flagship, Wallace ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing Warlord Krethix. He was a hulking creature covered in dark scales, with 4 eyes that glowed with cruel intelligence. Behind him, Wallace could see Krath officers working at their stations. I am Warlord Krethix of the Krath Empire, the creature said, his voice a deep rumble. You will identify yourselves before I destroy you. Admiral Greg Wallace, Earth Defense Force. You are hereby ordered to cease all hostile actions against the Velen population and withdraw your forces immediately. Krethix's 4 eyes widened. Then he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound, like rocks grinding together. His officers joined in, filling the Krath bridge with mocking laughter. Earth? Krethix said when he could speak again. I have never heard of this Earth. You arrive with 30 ships against my fleet of 300, and you make demands? Perhaps your species is not just weak, but stupid as well. Admiral Wallace's expression didn't change. This is your only warning, Warlord. Withdraw or be destroyed. The laughter intensified. Krethix leaned forward, his face filling the screen. I have conquered 40 systems, human. I have burned 100 worlds. Your little fleet will be debris within the hour. And then I will find this Earth of yours and teach your people what happens to those who challenge the Krath Empire. You've been warned, Wallace said quietly, and cut the transmission. Captain Linda Hayes stood on the bridge of her destroyer, the Valiant. Her crew was at battle stations, weapons charged and ready. She had fought in 6 major engagements in her career. This would be her 7th, and by far the most dangerous. Captain, her tactical officer said, the Krath are launching attack ships. Count is 50 vessels heading our way. Just 50? Linda said. Krethix must think we're not worth his full attention. He's about to learn differently, said Commander Ryan Foster. Her executive officer. Linda activated the fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Valiant. Execute Plan Delta. Fire on my mark. The human fleet had trained for this scenario. They had run simulations against superior numbers countless times. The key was precision, speed, and hitting the enemy so hard in the first strike that they never recovered their momentum. The 50 Krath attack ships came on in a wedge formation, weapons blazing. They were fast for Krath vessels and heavily shielded. Against a conventional fleet, they would have been devastating. Against humanity's latest technology, they lasted 90 seconds. Mark, Linda said calmly. The Valiant's main guns opened fire. Plasma lances, superheated to temperatures found in the cores of stars, lanced across space at near light speed. They punched through Krath shields like paper and melted armor like wax. Each shot was perfectly targeted, coordinated with the other ships in the fleet through quantum-linked computers. The first wave of plasma fire, destroyed 18 Krath ships before they could react. The second wave, launched 3 seconds later, took another 20. The survivors tried to scatter, but human fighters were already among them, moving with impossible agility and firing missiles that chased their targets through evasive maneuvers. In 90 seconds, all 50 Krath ships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris and superheated gas. On the Velen homeworld, Elder Miran watched from a shelter bunker as the human fleet engaged the Krath. The Velens had managed to maintain sensor contact despite the surface attacks. What they saw seemed impossible. The humans just destroyed 50 Krath warships in less than 2 minutes, a technician said, his voice filled with awe. The Krath are regrouping. They're pulling back their forward elements. Commander Kyle Harrison stood beside Miran, a rifle in his hands. He had refused to evacuate when the shields fell, choosing instead to help defend the shelter entrances. His face was grim with satisfaction as he watched the tactical display. "That's our fleet," Harrison said. "That's what happens when you fight people instead of helpless targets." On the Krath flagship, the laughter had died. Warlord Krethix stared at the debris field where 50 of his ships had been moments before. His officers were shouting reports, their voices edged with something the Krath rarely felt: fear. "Impossible," Krethix growled. "No species has weapons that powerful." "What are they?" His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Vrax, pulled up what little data they had on humanity. "Lord, our intelligence shows they fought a brief war in their own system 20 years ago. They annihilated an invasion force at a place called Broken Moon. The invaders numbered over 200 ships. The humans left no survivors. Why was I not told about this?" Krethix roared. "They have never interfered outside their own territory before, Lord. We had no reason to believe they would engage us here." Krethix watched the human fleet on his display. They were maintaining a defensive formation between his forces and the planet, not advancing but clearly ready to respond to any movement. Their ships were smaller than his capital vessels, but they moved with precision that spoke of superior training and technology. "Send a full assault," Krethix ordered. "All ships. I want those humans swept from space." "Lord, perhaps we should call for reinforcements from the core fleet," Vrax suggested carefully. "No." Krethix slammed a massive fist on his command console. "I will not show weakness by requesting aid against 30 ships. We outnumber them 10 to 1. Launch the assault." The Krath fleet surged forward, 200 vessels moving to overwhelm the human position through sheer mass. It was the tactic that had won them 40 systems. Superior numbers, concentrated fire, and the willingness to accept losses in pursuit of victory. Admiral Wallace watched them come. "Here we go. All ships, engage at will. Protect the planet. No craft bombardment gets through." What followed was not a battle. It was a demonstration of the difference between quantity and quality. The human ships moved through the Krath formation like dancers, their enhanced engines allowing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. They targeted weapon systems first, crippling Krath vessels before destroying them. The coordination was perfect. Ships supporting each other, covering weak points. Rotating through attack runs, Captain Danny Cooper led the fighter squadrons in precision strikes against the Krath capital ships. The fighters were small enough to avoid most of the heavy weapons, fast enough to outrun pursuit, and armed with missiles that could crack open even the thickest armor. Lieutenant Amy Richardson coordinated the fleet's defensive grid from her position on the Defender. Every ship's shields were linked, allowing them to share power and coverage. When a Krath vessel tried to get a clear shot at the planet's surface, it found itself facing concentrated fire from multiple human ships. The Krath kept coming. To their credit, they were brave. But bravery without skill was just death with extra steps. Admiral Wallace watched the casualty counts climb on the Krath side. 50 ships destroyed. Then 100. Then 150. The human fleet had taken damage, shields were strained and armor was scorched, but not a single ship had been lost. "They're breaking," Captain Hayes reported. "The rear elements of the Krath fleet are starting to pull back." "Let them go," Wallace ordered. "Focus on the ships still engaging and any vessel trying to target the surface." On the planet below, Commander Harrison watched the battle with grim satisfaction. The Krath ground forces had stopped their advance, confused by the sudden reversal in orbit. Some were retreating to their landing craft. Others were digging in, waiting for support that would never come. "The humans are winning," Elder Moran said, disbelief in his voice. "Against those odds, they're actually winning." "They came when no one else would," Harrison said. "And they're fighting for people who called them monsters." "That's what real strength looks like, Elder. Not the power to destroy, but the choice of when and why to use it." In orbit, Warlord Krethix finally understood what his empire had encountered. These humans were not like the other species the Krath had conquered. They didn't rely on council diplomacy or hope for mercy. They had built themselves into something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations. A species that could fight and win against overwhelming odds. "Recall all forces," Krethix ordered, his voice hollow. "Full retreat to the edge of the system." The Krath retreat had been too easy. Admiral Greg Wallace knew at the moment the enemy fleet reached the system's edge. Warlord Krethix was brutal and arrogant, but he hadn't conquered 40 systems by being stupid. "Admiral," Lieutenant Amy Richardson called from her station, "I'm detecting unusual power signatures from the Krath flagship. They're charging weapons, but the energy readings are inconsistent with a retreat." Wallace leaned forward in his command chair. "What kind of inconsistent?" "They're powering up their orbital bombardment systems. All of them." "Sir, if they fire those at the planet from this range, the devastation will be..." She didn't need to finish. Wallace understood. Krethix had lost the fleet battle, so he was going to do what the Krath did best. Make sure no one survived to celebrate the victory. "All ships, emergency intercept pattern," Wallace ordered. "Get between those bombardment vectors and the population centers." Now, the human fleet moved with desperate speed. Captain Linda Hayes pushed the Valiant's engines past safe limits, racing to position her destroyer over the largest Velan city. Around her, other ships did the same, spreading themselves across the most vulnerable targets. On the Krath flagship, Warlord Krethix watched the human response with satisfaction. They're protecting the planet. How noble. How foolish. "Lord, if we fire the bombardment weapons, we'll hit their ships as well," Sub-Commander Vrack said. "I'm counting on it," Krethix replied. "Their shields are already damaged from the battle. A full orbital strike will cripple them at best, destroy them at worst. Either way, we complete our mission. The Velans die, and we eliminate this human threat." He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire everything. Maximum yield. Show these humans what it means to stand against the Krath Empire." The Krath bombardment began. Hundreds of heavy plasma missiles launched from the retreating fleet, arcing back toward the planet. Each one carried enough destructive power to level a city. Together, they could render the Velan homeworld uninhabitable. The human fleet intercepted them. Captain Linda Hayes watched the missile swarm approaching on her tactical display. There were too many to shoot down. The only option was to take the hits themselves. "All power to forward shields," she ordered. "Brace for impact." The first missiles hit the Valiant shields like hammers. The barrier held, flared, and began to crack. More missiles came. The ship shuddered with each impact, systems overloading, power conduits burning out. "Shield strength at 40%, her tactical officer reported through gritted teeth. 30, 20. Linda gripped her command chair. "Keep us between those missiles and the city." "No matter what." The Valiant's shields failed on the 18th missile impact. The 19th hit the ship's armored hull directly, tearing through 3 decks and killing 8 crew members instantly. The 20th struck the port side, crippling the main engines, but the city below remained untouched. Across the fleet, the same scenario played out. The carrier defender took the bombardment meant for the Velan capital, her massive bulk absorbing punishment that would have killed millions. The cruiser Phoenix positioned herself over a medical research center, taking hits that left her dead in space, but operational. The destroyer Hope shielded a refugee camp. Her hull breached in 4 places, but her crew still fighting. Admiral Wallace watched his fleet being torn apart and felt each loss like a personal wound. But he did not order a retreat. The Velans had called for help. Humanity had answered. Now they would pay the price of that answer. "Sir, the Valiant is reporting catastrophic damage," Amy Richardson said, her voice thick with emotion. "Captain Hayes is requesting permission to evacuate non-essential personnel." "Permission denied," Wallace said quietly. "If they abandon position, that city dies." She knows that. On the planet's surface, Commander Kyle Harrison watched the human ships taking the bombardment meant for his position. He could see the Valiant directly overhead, burning but holding position. Shields gone, but still absorbing missile after missile with her own hull. "They're dying for us," Elder Mirren said, standing beside Harrison in the shelter entrance. Above them, explosions lit the sky as human ships intercepted Krath weapons. "Your people are dying to save mine." "That's what we do," Harrison said. "We protect those who can't protect themselves." A massive explosion rocked the ground. The destroyer Courage had taken a direct hit to her reactor core. The ship didn't explode, her crew venting the core at the last second to prevent a catastrophic detonation that would have rained radioactive debris on the city below. The ship was dead, drifting in orbit, but the city survived. Sergeant Jake Matthews had been in the shelter coordinating the defense against Krath ground forces when the bombardment began. Now he watched the human fleet sacrifice themselves overhead and made a decision. "Sir," he said to Harrison, "permission to take a strike team topside. The Krath landing forces are scattered and confused. If we hit them now, while their fleet is focused on the bombardment, we can drive them back to their landing craft." Harrison looked at the young Marine. Matthews was 26 years old, a veteran of 3 campaigns, and absolutely fearless. "You'll be exposed to the bombardment. So are our ships," Matthews said simply. "If they can take it, so can we." Harrison nodded. "Take volunteers only." "Good hunting, Sergeant." Matthews assembled a team of 30 Marines and 40 Velan volunteers who had weapons training. They emerged from the shelter into a nightmare landscape. The sky burned with the light of human ships taking punishment meant for the ground. Debris fell like rain. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal. "Move fast, stay low," Matthews ordered. "Hit them before they know we're coming." The Krath ground forces had expected easy slaughter. Instead, they found themselves facing a combined human and Velan force that attacked with precision and fury. Matthews led his Marines in a flanking maneuver while the Velan volunteers provided covering fire from elevated positions. The Krath were tough and well-armed, but they were also confused and demoralized by their fleet's failure in orbit. The ground battle was brutal and close range, the kind of fighting where training and determination mattered more than superior numbers. Matthews shot a Krath soldier who was trying to set up a heavy weapon aimed at a shelter entrance. He rolled behind cover as return fire tore up the ground where he'd been standing. A Velan volunteer named Taryn appeared beside him, firing with surprising accuracy for someone who had learned to shoot only 3 days ago. "Thank you," Taryn said between shots. "For coming. For fighting. Thank us when we win," Matthews replied, popping up to fire another burst dot in orbit. The Krath bombardment was finally ending. They had expended their missiles, and the human fleet, battered but unbroken, still held position. Admiral Wallace assessed the damage with a heavy heart. 4 ships destroyed completely. 12 more heavily damaged. Casualties were still being counted, but initial reports suggested over 300. Crew members dead and twice that many wounded. But the Velen cities stood intact. Millions of lives saved at the cost of hundreds. The Krath fleet is withdrawing for real this time, Amy Richardson reported. They're jumping out of the system. Let them go, Wallace said. We've done enough damage for one day. Captain Linda Hayes sat in her damaged command chair aboard the Valiant, watching the Krath fleet disappear into jump space. Her ship was a wreck. Main engines offline, weapon systems destroyed, hull breaches on 6 decks. But her crew was alive, and the city below was safe. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the surface, her communication officer said. It's the Velens. All of them. Every broadcast station. Every communication system. They're thanking us. Linda activated the view screen. It showed hundreds of thousands of Velens emerging from shelters, looking up at the damaged human ships overhead. They were crying, waving, broadcasting messages of gratitude in every language and frequency. Elder Marin's voice came through clearly. To the humans of the Fifth Fleet, there are no words sufficient to express our gratitude. You came when no one else would. You fought for us when we had no right to expect it. You gave your lives to save ours. We were wrong about you. So terribly, completely wrong. You are not monsters. You are heroes. Linda felt tears on her own cheeks. She keyed her microphone. This is Captain Linda Hayes of the Earth Defense Force. We came because it was the right thing to do. We fought because you needed help. We bled because that's what it cost to save you. That's not heroism. That's just being human. On the surface, Sergeant Matthews and his strike team had driven the last Krath forces back to their landing craft. The enemy was retreating in disarray, leaving behind equipment and casualties in their haste to escape. Commander Harrison joined Matthews at the perimeter, watching the Krath ships lift off and flee toward orbit. Good work, Sergeant. The Velens did most of it, sir, Matthews said, nodding toward Taryn and the other volunteers. They learned fast, fought hard. Harrison looked at the damaged city around them. Buildings were scarred but standing. Fires burned in some districts, but the emergency services were already responding. The casualties would be significant, but nothing like the extinction-level event the Krath had planned. Think we made a difference? Matthews asked. Harrison pointed up at the human fleet, battered ships holding position above the cities they'd protected. Sergeant, we just taught the entire. 3 weeks after the battle, the Galactic Council chamber on the neutral world of Sanctum was filled to capacity. Representatives from 147 species packed the observation galleries, waiting to see what would happen when humanity formally addressed the Council for the first time. Since their rejection 8 years ago, Ambassador Nicole Parker stood at the speaker's podium, flanked by Admiral Greg Wallace in his formal uniform and Commander Kyle Harrison, who had been recalled from the Velen homeworld specifically for this session. Behind them, a holographic display showed the evidence they had recovered from the Krath invasion. The Council chairman, an elderly Centauri named Vex, opened the session. The Council recognizes Ambassador Parker of Earth. You may present your statement. Nicole activated the holographic display. Images filled the chamber. Images that made many of the delegates turn away in horror. Cities burning. Populations being slaughtered. Entire civilizations reduced to ash and memory. These are the Krath Empire's accomplishments over the last 20 years, Nicole said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. 40 systems conquered. 16 species driven to extinction. Estimated death toll, 6 billion sentient beings. And what did this council do while all of this happened? She paused, letting the silence stretch. Nothing, she continued. You watched. You debated. You formed committees and task forces and study groups. You passed resolutions condemning the violence. And you did absolutely nothing to stop it. A delegate from the Hexus Collective stood. Ambassador Parker, the Council cannot intervene in every local conflict. We must maintain neutrality and... Neutrality? Nicole cut him off. Is that what you call it when you abandon an entire species to genocide? The Velans came to this council begging for help. You voted to do nothing because you were afraid of the Krath. Just like you rejected humanity 8 years ago because you were afraid of us. Another delegate, this one from the Trill Commonwealth, spoke up. The situations are entirely different. Humanity has a documented history of violence and military aggression. Admiral Wallace stepped forward. You're right. We do have that history. And because of that history, when the Velans called for help, we knew how to answer. We sent ships. We sent soldiers. We bled to save people who had called us monsters. He activated another section of the holographic display. This one showed the Fifth Fleet's engagement with the Krath, the desperate defense of the Velan cities, and the final casualties. 47 human beings died protecting the Velan homeworld, Wallace said. 47 men and women who went into battle knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned, because it was the right thing to do. Can anyone here say the same? Can anyone here claim they would have done what we did? The chamber fell silent. Elder Moran stood in the Velan delegation section, his forearms trembling with emotion. Chairman Vex. If I may speak, Marin said. The council recognizes Elder Moran of the Velan people. Marin walked to the speaker's podium. His people had prepared a formal speech, but he set aside the datapad containing it and spoke from his heart. 8 years ago, I stood in this chamber and argued against humanity's admission to the council, he began. I called them dangerous. I said they were too violent, too aggressive, too quick to resort to force. I convinced 17 other species to vote with us in rejecting their petition. He looked directly at Admiral Wallace. I was wrong. Not just wrong, but completely, shamefully wrong. When my people faced extinction, when this council abandoned us, we had nowhere else to turn. So we called the species we had rejected, the ones we had called monsters, and we begged for help. Marin's voice broke. They came. They fought. They died for us. Not because we deserved it. Not because we had earned it. But because that is who they are. The humans taught us that being feared and being dangerous are not the same as being evil. They showed us that true strength is protecting the weak, not exploiting them. He turned to face the full council. I am formally requesting that this council immediately grant full membership to humanity and publicly apologize for our previous rejection. Furthermore, I propose that we establish a joint defense force, led by human military commanders, to prevent future Krath aggression. The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates supported the proposal immediately. Others protested, citing the same concerns about human, military power that had led to the original rejection. Commander Harrison stepped forward. May I address the council? Chairman Vex nodded. You may speak, Commander. Harrison looked around the chamber at the dozens of species represented there. I spent 2 years on the Velan homeworld before the Krath attack. I learned about their culture, their dedication to healing and knowledge. I saw what gentle, peaceful people they were. And I watched them face extinction because that gentleness made them vulnerable, and this council was too afraid to protect them. He pulled up another holographic display, this one showing military data from across the galaxy. The Krath Empire isn't the only threat out there. There are 6 other aggressive species actively expanding through military conquest. dozen more waiting to see if aggression will be rewarded or punished. Every time this council chooses fear over action, you make the galaxy more dangerous for everyone. A delegate from the Orion Assembly stood. You speak of danger, but humanity itself is the most militarized species in this sector. How do we know you won't become the very thing you claim to oppose? Dr. Sophie Bennett, who had accompanied the human delegation, rose to answer. You know, because you saw what we did at Valen. We had the power to take that world for ourselves. After the Krath fled, there was nothing stopping us. But we didn't conquer. We helped rebuild. We shared our technology. We asked for nothing in return, except that the Velans remember what it means to protect the helpless. She activated a medical hologram. In the 3 weeks since the battle, human doctors have been working alongside Velan researchers. We've shared our combat medicine advances. They've shared their disease treatment protocols. Together, we've developed new techniques that will save lives across both our species. That's what we want from the galaxy. Partnership, not domination. Elder Mirren spoke again. The Valans have already begun construction of a joint defense station in our system. It will be crewed by both humans and Velans, a symbol of our new alliance. We are also opening our medical research facilities to human scientists. The knowledge we hoarded out of fear, we now share in gratitude. The debate continued for hours. Finally, Chairman Vex called for a vote on the Velan proposal. The chamber fell silent as the voting began. One by one, the delegates registered their positions. The tally appeared on the main display. In favor of human membership, 103 votes. Against, 31 votes abstaining. 13 votes. The proposal passed with a strong majority. Chairman Vex stood. By order of this council, humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Council, effective immediately. Furthermore, we formally apologize for our previous rejection and recognize that our fear blinded us to your character. Ambassador Parker felt tears sting her eyes. 8 years of rejection erased in a single vote. But the victory felt hollow, knowing it had cost 47 lives to prove humanity's worth. Admiral Wallace seemed to read her thoughts. He leaned close and whispered, "They didn't die to change minds. They died because saving lives was more important than politics." This vote is just a bonus. The council session concluded with the establishment of a joint task force to address the Krath threat and other aggressive expansionist species. Admiral Wallace was appointed as the military commander, with representatives from 12 different species serving as advisors. But the real work began after the political theater ended. Dr. Peter Walsh, the chief medical officer from the Defender, had spent the past 3 weeks on the Velan homeworld, treating both human and Velan wounded. He worked 20-hour days, often alongside Velan doctors who had once feared human barbarism, but now respected human dedication to saving lives. Dr. Walsh called a young Velan physician named Selin. "We have another human patient incoming. Burns and radiation exposure from the Valiant's reactor leak." Walsh rushed to the emergency bay, where a human engineer was being brought in on a stretcher. The man's injuries were severe, but Walsh had seen worse in his years of service. He worked quickly, using a combination of human trauma protocols and Velan cellular regeneration techniques. 6 hours later, the engineer was stable and recovering. As Walsh scrubbed it out, Selin approached him. "I wanted to apologize," the young Velan said quietly. "Before the attack, I believed humans were violent and cruel. I thought your medicine would be as brutal as your weapons. But watching you work, seeing how hard you fight to save every life, I understand now. Violence is a tool you carry, not what you are." Walsh smiled tiredly. "We're not perfect, Selin. We've done terrible things in our history. But we try to be better than our worst moments. That's all anyone can do. Back on Earth, A memorial service was held for the 47 crew members who died at Velen. Their names were read aloud, one by one, and added to the Wall of Honor at the Defense Force Academy. Captain Linda Hayes attended. Still recovering from injuries she received when the Valiant took the bombardment for the Velen capital, General Frank Morrison gave